No man ever steps in the same river twice, because it is not the same river, and he's not the same man. That single line changed philosophy forever. Before modern science, before psychology, before physics, there was a strange philosopher sitting alone in the ancient Greek city of Ephesus, watching fire burn and rivers flow, and coming to a terrifying conclusion. Reality is never still. Everything changes, everything moves, everything becomes something else, and if you try to cling to permanence, you suffer. This was the philosophy of Heraclitus, one of the most mysterious, difficult, and influential thinkers in human history. He was called the weeping philosopher, the obscure, the philosopher of fire, and the man who believed conflict itself holds the universe together. Today we're diving deep into his life, his philosophy, his cryptic sayings, and why modern thinkers, from Nietzsche to Hegel to Jung, were obsessed with him. Because once you understand him, you start seeing the change everywhere. The earlier Greek philosophers, the pre Socratics, were trying to answer one huge question: what is reality actually made of? Thales of Miletus said something about everything coming from water. Anaximander believed reality emerged from something infinite and undefined called the Apeiron. Anaximenes thought everything was air. They stopped explaining the world through mythology alone. Instead of saying Zeus causes lightning, they said, what natural processes cause lightning? The shift was enormous in size. But then Heraclitus arrived, and he completely changed everything. Because he wasn't just asking, what is the universe made of? He asked, why does everything change? Ephesus was a wealthy Greek city on the coast of Asia Minor. Heraclitus was probably born around 535 BCE into an aristocratic family. He could have become politically powerful. Instead, he rejected public life almost entirely. Ancient sources describe him as isolated, arrogant, and contemptuous of ordinary people. He supposedly said most humans are asleep. Not literally asleep, spiritually asleep, mentally asleep, blind to reality. He criticized politicians, poets, religious rituals, and even other philosophers. He thought humanity lived in illusion. And unlike philosophers who taught publicly, Heraclitus wrote in fragments, short, cryptic statements that sounded more like riddles than explanations. Imagine a philosopher tweeting paradoxes that people spend 2,500 years trying to decode. That was Heraclitus. His book, usually called On Nature, has been lost. All we have are fragments quoted by later writers, and those fragments are famously difficult. Even in ancient times, readers struggled to understand him. That's why he earned the nickname Heraclitus the Obscure. Now, his most famous idea, the doctrine of flux, the belief that reality is in constant change. Heraclitus believed nothing in existence remains fixed. Everything is becoming something else. The universe is process, not stability, not permanence, process. This idea is captured in his most famous river analogy. You cannot step into the same river twice. Why? Because the water is constantly moving. The river changes every second. But there's a second layer people often miss. You are changing too. Your cells change, your memories change, your emotions change, your identity evolves. Even if the river stayed identical, you wouldn't. So the world is not made of stable things, it's made of transformations. Modern science actually echoes this in a lot of ways. Atoms move constantly. Stars are born and then they die. Species evolve. Your body replaces cells continuously. Even mountains erode. Heraclitus saw reality not as static objects, but as movement itself. And this was radically different from later philosophers like Parmenides, who argued that true reality never changes at all. The clash between Heraclitus and Parmenides has become the most foundational conflicts of Western philosophy. Is reality change, or is change an illusion? That debate still is ongoing today. So, what substance represented reality for Heraclitus? Fire. But this is often misunderstood. He probably didn't mean the universe was literally made of only of flames, but that fire symbolized transformation. What does fire do? It consumes, transforms, destroys, creates, and never stays still. A flame exists only by changing. The moment change stops, the flame dies. That's exactly how Heraclitus viewed existence. Reality survives through constant transformation. Fire became his metaphor for the cosmos itself, a living process, dynamic, restless, self transforming. Now things get even stranger. Heraclitus believed opposites are not truly separate, they depend on each other. Day and night, life and death, hot and cold, war and peace, each defines the other. You only know health because illness exists. You only recognize peace because conflict exists. And according to Heraclitus, opposites are secretly unified. One of his fragments says, "The road up and the road down are one and the same." At first, this sounds nonsensical, but if you think about it, a road itself doesn't change, only your direction changes. It's the same reality, but different perspective. Another fragment says, "Cold things warm up, warm things cool down." Everything transforms into its opposite. Reality is tension, like a stretched bowstring or a lyre string. Without tension, harmony disappears. This led to one of the most shocking statements: war is the father of all things. Now, he wasn't glorifying violence for entertainment. He meant conflict generates change. Without tension, nothing develops. Think about evolution. Species compete, environments pressure organisms, adaptation emerges. Now, personal struggles. Struggle through changes people. Pain teaches lessons, and the crises reshape your identity. For Heraclitus, harmony doesn't come from eliminating conflict, it comes from balancing opposing forces. That idea influenced Stoicism, dialectics, modern psychology, even Eastern philosophies that emphasize balance. That's probably Heraclitus' deepest concept, the logos. The word is hard to translate. It can mean reason, principle, order, logic, or underlying structure. Heraclitus believed the universe appears chaotic, but underneath the chaos is a hidden order, a rational pattern. The logos governs reality. Most people fail to understand it because they live distracted, are asleep, as he says, trapped in appearances. But the wise person recognizes the deeper pattern beneath change. This is one reason later philosophers and theologians become fascinated with Heraclitus. The concept of logos later became massively important in Stoicism and Hellenistic philosophy, early Christianity. In the Gospel of John, for example, in the beginning was the logos. That idea partly echoes Greek philosophical traditions that Heraclitus helped shape. Heraclitus didn't have a very optimistic view of humanity. He believed most people avoid the truth, chase comfort instead, and cling to illusions of permanence. Humans desperately want stability, permanent relationships, permanent success, permanent identity. But Heraclitus says stability itself is the illusion. And that can be unsettling to some people, because if everything changes, what can we trust? What remains afterwards? Is there anything permanent? Heraclitus' answer seems to be the process itself. Change is the only constant. Ironically, that phrase, though often attributed with him, is not a direct quote, but it perfectly captures his worldview. Heraclitus influenced an absurd number of thinkers. Plato and Aristotle, for example. Even philosophers who disagreed with him had to wrestle with his ideas. Plato worried that if everything changes constantly, knowledge itself becomes impossible. Aristotle criticized parts of Heraclitus' logic while still engaging deeply with his ideas. The Stoics admired the logos and the rational structure of nature. Marcus Aurelius echoed Heraclitean themes constantly: impertinence, acceptance, cosmic order. George Hegel famously said, "There is no proposition of Heraclitus which I have not adopted." Hegel's idea that reality evolved through contradiction owes a massive debt to Heraclitus. Friedrich Nietzsche loved Heraclitus. Nietzsche rejected static morality and fixed truths. He saw existence as dynamic becoming, very Heraclitean. Oddly enough, modern physics often sounds similar to Heraclitus than ancient common sense. Reality is energy and process. Nothing is completely static. Even matter itself is movement at microscopic levels. Here's the strange thing. Heraclitus says everything changes, but his philosophy itself survived for over 2,500 years. Now why? Because humans keep rediscovering the same experience. Life never stops moving. Empires collapse. Technology transforms society. Relationships evolve. Bodies age. Ideas mutate. And every generation tries to pretend things will finally stabilize. Then reality changes again. That's why Heraclitus still feels modern. He understood something psychologically brutal. People suffer because they resist change. But reality doesn't care. The river keeps flowing. So, who was Heraclitus? A lonely philosopher? A mystic, as they say? A proto scientist, maybe? A poet of chaos? Maybe all of them. But more than anything, Heraclitus was a philosopher of becoming. He looked at the universe and saw not just solid objects, but transformation in them. Not permanence, but flow. And maybe that's why his words still hit hard today. Because deep down, we all know that feeling. The person you were 5 years ago is gone. The world you grew up in is disappearing all around you. Everything moves on. Everything changes. And whether we like it or not, the river keeps flowing.